Fantastic. So I changed titles slightly. I'm hoping that's okay, and I'm still going to deliver on what everybody is expecting. But I'm going to talk a little bit about online assessment of children who are at high risk of ASC and or language impairments. As I said, I'm Helen Spicer-Kane. I'm from City University of London, and I'm also an independent therapist. I work with children who have autism spectrum conditions, so I also can talk teletherapy if that's of interest to anyone. But in terms of assessment, I'm going to put my study in a little bit of context for you. I'm currently undertaking a longitudinal study, which is called the SibSpeak study, and it started in 2014 with 92 children who were 13 months old at the time, with no additional needs at study onset, exposed to English as a main language in their home, who fell into 3 groups. So important part about the study, 92 children, 3 groups. So we have 53 low risk control children whose parents and siblings have no history of difficulties with language, social communication and or literacy. We have a social high risk group in the study who have first degree relatives who either have a diagnosed ASC or have a high level of traits associated with ASC on questionnaires. And we have a language high risk group in this study who have first degree relatives who have history of language and or literacy difficulties. So that might be siblings with current language difficulties, siblings and or parents who were late talkers, or parents or siblings who have dyslexia. So this is the population I'm studying, and we saw them at mean age 13 months. Subsample were seen at time 2, which is just the mean age was 33.7 months, so that's about 2 years 10 months. 28 children who were seen then, and most of what I'm going to talk about today is a time 3 assessment, where so far I've seen 33 of these children again, and they are now mean age 82.6 months, so that's about 6'10", 6'11", including children across the 3 groups. I don't have any results to talk to you about today, but I am going to talk to you about what I'm doing with these children as part of this longitudinal assessment. There's your context, and this is what the study design looks like. So when the children were babies, we took from them measures including a video of the children during play, the Preschool Language Scales 4th edition, UK CDI, so that's a vocabulary and gesture checklist completed by parents. We have some other questionnaires, and we also have a range of dynamic assessment measures that are new to this study that were given to the children when they were babies. The children who I saw at time 2, we also have videos and PLS4 outcomes and information about parental concerns at age 2 to 3. And most of what I'm going to talk about today relates to the time 3 assessment. So this is an age 6 to 7 assessment, where we have this large battery of tests to get a comprehensive view of how the children are doing. So the assessments which I'm using with the children are the Ravens matrices, the CEL5, the grammar and phonology screening assessment, Bracken school readiness, informal assessment of concepts of print, naming speed. The assessments I'm using are from the CTOP. We've got narrative, expression and comprehension using Peter and the cat. The CEL5 pragmatics activities checklist, which I'm going to say something about later. And then we've got 2 parent questionnaires, so the children's communication checklist and the social responsiveness scale. So we've got a large battery of tests. This was all really well planned and funded and ready to go and piloted, and then COVID happened. So
Helen, I'm so sorry to bother you. I think everyone else is absolutely fine, but one person can't see your PowerPoint. Is it at all possible just to turn it off and back on again, just the once, to see if then she can?
Yes, sure.
So sorry to disturb you halfway through.
Is everyone seeing the PowerPoint?
I haven't had any messages to, I can see it brilliantly. I haven't had any other messages.
Okay.
Catherine, could you possibly put your mic on to say if you can see it now, Catherine?
It could be that it's the iPad. Sorry, don't worry, carry on. I'll fiddle around with my device. Thank you though.
Okay.
No problem.
Sorry, Helen, thank you very much.
That's fine. So we had this assessment battery designed that was designed to take 1 to 1.5 hours per session for 2 sessions to be seen at home or school, nicely piloted, ready to go, and then COVID happened. And that led me to have to make a big decision about how to drive this research forward. big question really was delay data collection or go for it. The problem with delaying is the children were getting older. We were going to need a new test battery. It wouldn't be what was funded. We were going to need new ethics approval anyway if we did that. And so there followed 6 months of research, planning, testing, and amendments to ethics to allow online assessment. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I am now actually doing, which is not particularly different, I have to say, in that we found workarounds for most of the ways in which we intended to assess the children. I'm just going to say a couple of words about the paediatric telepractice assessment evidence base. The headline, my good news, is it's small and it's emerging, but it does exist. It is there. And hopefully, I'm hoping that it will grow as more and more people are carrying out assessment by telepractice. It wasn't an evidence base I was intending to contribute to, but I'm assuming eventually that I will be. So there was a systematic review in 2014, which included only 5 studies of paediatric telepractice assessment, and 2 were only of speech. So there were only 3 studies that talked about language assessments. And they suggested that language assessment was reasonable had reasonable reliability via telepractice across these 3 studies. But one of them used only 7 children. Another that's pretty good had 25, found really good agreement on severity judgment and testing scores on the CAL4 when simultaneously administered by a telepractice practitioner, but simultaneously scored by a face-to-face SLT who was in the room with the child. The reliability between telehealth and simultaneous scoring was very good. And then there's another paper which talks about using some other language assessments, but the methods are not particularly clearly described. However, the overall message from the systematic review was that generally, although it's very small, there is some evidence that teleassessment can be reliable for children. They did pick up some particular problems, morphological use. So if you think about a plural S, for example, or a third person singular S, that can be quite hard to distinguish unless you've got a really good audio connection. And there's also the thing that came up earlier in Daisy's talk about needing to repeat instructions. This review also concluded that the evidence of reliability in speech assessment was lower than for language assessment and needed to continue to be investigated. But there have also been 3 studies that I've found since then, since the systematic review. 2 of them use the CAL4, so from the same research group, one with children aged 8 to 12, and one with children with autism spectrum conditions who were 9 to 12, and followed the same method that I talked about earlier of simultaneous telehealth and face-to-face scoring with really good reliability. There's also a paper about language screening in India, which again found a really good language agreement between on language screening between a face-to-face assessor and a telepractice assessor. And that was not simultaneous, so children received one of the assessments first. So some children had the remote screening and then a face-to-face screening a couple of weeks later, and some the reverse, and found again really good reliability. Pearson also has evidence for administering the CAL5 on Q Interactive by iPads. They haven't yet published information about the validity of remote assessment with using the CAL on Q Global, but they say it exists and there's no reason to believe it's not reliable. Also, just to note that there is an emerging evidence base for assessing adults with formal assessments by telepractice and with conducting therapy with children using remote therapy. So there is a small evidence base. What am I doing? Well, first of all, since this is a research study, there are lots of issues about consent and questionnaires, which we are getting around using Qualtrics, which is a survey software. So parents are emailed the information sheets and then complete consent for their children to take part in the study on Qualtrics. That's secure, so only I can see the information that they submit there. And then for the online assessment sessions, I've been using Zoom. I've decided that Zoom is really easy to use. And also, as I've been finding, that lots of parents are familiar with it. So I've done 33 assessments so far and not yet found a family that wasn't familiar already with using Zoom, didn't already have an account. And the big draw about Zoom for me was the option to share remote control with the child so that they can move your cursor on the screen. So you can share an activity, you can both be clicking on different parts of an activity, in turn, for example, or that you can see where they're pointing to with the cursor. There were obviously some security considerations involved in this, including things like making sure the software is always up to date, that calls are password protected, that I use waiting rooms and only admit people who I'm expecting, lock the room, that sessions are recorded to my computer and stored encrypted rather than on the cloud. And I'm not recording the whole session, I'm only recording snippets. And I've also, as a paid Zoom member, been able to change data routing so that the data of the call stays within the area protected by GDPR. So quite a lot of thought went into the security around this. And then also to the practicalities. So for physical assessment books, for the majority of assessments, I'm using a visualizer. I know that Daisy talked earlier about rigging cameras. You can also do that. I was fortunate that the funder was very happy for me to use some of the money I wasn't using for petrol to purchase a visualizer. So for the books, the assessments where we have permission to show materials on a camera, they can be shown under a visualizer to the child. And I'm using Pearson's Q Global system to administer the CAL5 digitally. A lot of this is made possible by Pearson's telepractice no objection letter. So Pearson, manufacturer of a lot of assessments, created a no objection letter saying that in the majority of circumstances during COVID, they are happy for assessment books to be shown under a visualizer, but not digitized. So we're in line with copyright. Another of the big practicalities is preparing parents and children for the session. So I've given parents quite a lot of information on making sure their child is on a comfortable chair, making sure that they've had a snack, that they've got a drink, that they know they're not to help their child with the questions, even though they can help with the computer, and etc., etc. And I always remind them at the start of the session that I'm asking them not to help the child with the assessment. I also have had to step in a couple of times when I've heard parents repeating instructions in sections where they shouldn't be repeated. But I have prepared them for this, and I've been using visual timetables for the children, and also the children have their own information sheet that explains what will happen when they see me. And we have parents present during the session because these are young children. Their computer skills are often not excellent, but also we're trying to ensure that we're safeguarding them and ensuring their well-being. They have access to breaks, but also I'm monitoring the children's attention during the sessions to make sure that they can cope. And if it looks like they're really losing attention to the activities, that we are stopping and keeping it within their capability to attend, just as I would face-to-face. There we go. The tricky part that I had was what to do with the less formal components of what I wanted to assess with these children. So having figured out the formal assessment, I turned to thinking about the CAL5 Pragmatics Activities Checklist. This is new in CAL5 from CAL4, and what it is previously, Pragmatics has only really been rated on a rating scale by a parent or a teacher who knows the child, and there's been no system for an experimenter making judgments of Pragmatics. And the CAL5 Pragmatics Activities Checklist gives you the opportunity to engage the child in 3 activities where you can observe their functional communication and social interaction, and then score them against a checklist of pragmatic skills. So the activities I had in mind from their list were teach and play a game, build something out of blocks, and recommend a gift. And the checklist is then completed by the therapist based on their observations of the child and compared with a criterion score. Now, obviously, this was trickier to figure out how I was going to do this remotely, but I'm going to. So one of my key reflection points has been the importance of talking with parents about their role in the assessment. So as I said, first of all, preparing them and reminding them of that with the child present, that I'm hoping they won't help their child to answer the questions. And as I said, occasionally I have stepped in to ask if they could please not repeat during this part of the assessment where repetitions are not allowed. But the other thing that parents have been able to do for me is tell me how well they are hearing. So for example, in the recalling sentences subtest, where I'm saying a sentence and the child is repeating it, it sometimes could be hard to know whether the audio's gone funny or whether the child has actually heard the sentence and they can't repeat it. So what I have there is parents primed to tell me if the audio cuts out and they don't hear me correctly, so that I can otherwise assume that any mistakes are related to the child's processing rather than what they're hearing. I would also say that the remote control has been a really key feature for being able to engage children in receptive and interactive tasks. And also I've been able to make observations of less formal activities and pragmatic observation, but I have to say that I am having to reflect on what is pragmatically typical over Zoom. So for example, where it might look like a child is not making eye contact, that might be because they are looking at you on the screen and making eye contact rather than at the camera, for example. So it's about thinking about where is their camera placed, and are they looking at the screen or are they looking at the camera? And also about gesture, I think, is possibly different. Some children still gesture, even though we're not in the same space, so they still try and point to things on the screen. Some understand the need to use the cursor as a gesture if they want to point something out. So I think those pragmatic features are different. And there is, as Daisy said before, a big issue about assessments not being normed for telepractice. However, I'm hoping that some of my data will contribute to that. And although I haven't said anything to you about the data, we are finding so far that it looks sensible. So the things that we are expecting to correlate are correlating, and we are getting the sorts of results that we expect. So hopefully, I'm hoping I can add to that evidence of reliability and validity. Yeah, I know I've come out of slideshow. Yeah, just want to acknowledge everybody who's taken part in my research, really, and open for questions. I've got references and things in there that you can share the slides for.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Helen. That is really interesting. It's lovely to see some videos from both sides. That always really helps bring things alive. And some really good, it's great when you said at the beginning you found workarounds for most of your tasks and assessments. We can see that with your creativeness at the end. So I think there's going to be loads of top tips. There's somebody asking, somebody saying they love the Space Croc. Is the Lego Designer free to use?
Lego Digital Designer is free.
Wow.
Lego don't update it anymore, but it is still available for free. I'm thinking that based on me doing this and talking to parents and other therapists about it, they're probably going to get an upsurge in downloads and wonder why. But you can download it for free, and lots of the families have done so because their children have really enjoyed it.
Oh, brilliant. Fabulous. People saying considering pragmatics via Zoom is fascinating. What was the crocodile game, and is it available online?
So I use some online games. So I have some sort of sites that I use for things like Snakes and Ladders and Connect4 that are available freely. I did purchase a few games. So the Crocodile Dentist game is a purchase from Teachers Pay Teachers, designed to run in PowerPoint over a screen share. It was not very expensive.
So Teachers Pay Teachers may be a good place to look for other.
There are plenty of games that PowerPoint games on there that people have created that you don't need to, you just can. I've also got one that is called Flying Pirate and Yeti and My Noodles. Those of you that know children's games will recognise which popular children's games those come from.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just wanting to, there's just a question a couple of people are asking. Now, I have the paid Zoom version, and I imagine you do too. And people are saying they're struggling to give the child remote control.
So you have to enable it in the settings. I'm not sure if it's anything to do with free or paid or not. I don't actually know. I can check, but you have to enable it in your settings. So you have to go into your long list of Zoom settings on the web browser and do the one that allows remote control, because it's not enabled by default.
Okay, and certainly I know that in the past, the free version, for those of you who are asking this question, in the past, the free version definitely did allow it. Probably the best way to do it is just Google, actually. There's loads of, there'll be an FAQ. If you Google it, then it'll bring up the FAQ on the Zoom website, and you'll be able to see, and it'll give you instructions from there for what Helen's just suggested. So
I've also had to learn what it looks like from the child's perspective when they're on a laptop versus a tablet, and what they have to do to accept the remote control at their end.
Yes.
That's also been a process of figuring out.
Yes, because you
But they usually get it quite quickly once you've told them how to do it.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's useful if you've got friends and family who were on a different platform. That's how I did it. Can you tell me can you send me a photo of your screen?
I get my husband on Zoom with me at his computer in the other room and run between the two to see what I can see if I do something at my end.
Excellent. Well, thank you very, very much, Helen. That's all the questions and comments there. Brilliant, really, really so helpful and really, really interesting. So,
and I'm happy to take more questions by email or on Twitter if anyone's got other things they want to ask.